Oh God! That was sick. I don't know how well I didn't think I even got a hook hook. Might be an upgrade too. Yeah, I think so. Oh man, he spoiled that bro.
Young man, take a look at me now. I'm down to play today. You can string me up and bring the crowd. That's all I need to say. Voice of an angel, entertainment for a king. No rhythm to speak. I wish to God you could sing. Modern Helen of Troy in a real world style. Could start a religion with a launch coat smile. And I was born with a rock and roll soul. Here's what I need, make me whole. Yeah, I was born with a rock and roll soul. Here's what I need, make me whole. Yeah.
Well, get those live vests zipped and clipped, strap down those rods, and stash away those tackle bags because we are going fishing. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Bass Tour Anglers Podcast. I'm your host, Keith Niswonger, and in this episode, we're going to talk about jerkbaits. There's an infinite amount of information about jerkbaits on YouTube, and some of it is very good. I'm in California, and I know we don't have much to complain about in the weather department, but winter has arrived with a vengeance, and it is cold, and fishing has become really tough. In this episode, I'm going to share some things that I learned a long time ago about jerkbaits, and I think you're going to find it very interesting, and I hope helpful. But first, if you like the content we produce on this channel, please hit the subscribe button and leave us a comment if you're so inclined. As you know, we are the Western representatives for ducket fishing. You know these guys, the strongest pro staff in all of tournament fishing. We are adding new dealerships in the West just about every week. If you are in Ventura, Los Angeles County, Orange County, the Inland Empire, Lake Havasu, Sacramento, we have a store to hook you up. If you have a tackle shop or know of one that we should call on, send us a DM or go to our website at www.basstouranglers.com and send us an email. We would love to tell you about the ducket fishing lineup of pro-driven products, rods, reels, and baits. Jerk baits. Obviously, the name speaks for itself. It is one of the few techniques that requires the angler to work the rod tip in a certain way in order to impart action on the bait. Most lures have their own action, but a jerkbait needs the angler to work that rod tip in order for it to be effective. In the mid-90s, I did a lot of promotional work and some tournament fishing. I was a regular on the seminar speaking circuit, and I worked on Buck Potter's bass bin. There's a name that goes way, way back. But if you are familiar with the Fred Hall shows in California, then there's a good chance you remember Buck Potter's bass bin. The bass bin was a large aquarium, a large tank built on the back of a tractor trailer truck. And Buck Potter would drive this bass bin all over the United States, going to different sports shows. The tank was filled with bass that had been electroshocked from a local reservoir. Back in those days, there was a dozen or so of us that would be regulars on the, I guess you'd call it, seminar speaking circuit. And it was a lot of fun. We would always see the same people at the various sport shows. And of course, we were very competitive. We would get up there to do our presentations, and we wanted to catch fish. Now, we did not use hooks. We were not allowed to use hooks for good reason. But anyway, we counted the bites, and so it was very funny to watch the various speakers get up there and to do their best to try to make these fish bite. Now, remember, these fish were essentially lobotomized. I mean, they were minding their own business at their reservoir. They got hit by however many volts the shocking boat used, and they got dumped in this tank for the public to watch and for the speakers to do their demonstrations with. Needless to say, it was very difficult to get these fish to bite. Um, so for myself, I learned very quickly that if I was going to keep the attention of, people sitting out there in an audience for 20 to 30 minutes, I was going to need to really provide some good instruction. And, inject a little comedy, inject a little self-deprecating humor, things like that to keep the audience's attention. And that is what we did. So one day I got up in the tank and I decided that I was going to talk about suspending jerkbaits. I took a jerkbait and I used some lead tape and I got it perfectly balanced so that it would suspend and not sink and not rise. And I threw the bait out, pulled it down a couple of twitches, and then I started talking about what I was doing. I went over the rod, the correct rod to use, and the correct reel to use, and I was talking about the line. And probably about 2.5 to 3 minutes into my discussion, there was a buzz in the audience. You could tell there was some excitement building. I mean, wow, I don't think it was my speaking. No, what had happened is after sitting there for about 2 to 3 minutes, suspended perfectly, one of these lobotomized bass that had been in the tank, not biting, slowly rose up to where the bait was and grabbed it. Well, needless to say, that made me a hero of the moment. I got one of these fish to actually strike a bait, but I didn't do anything. All I did was throw the bait out and let it sit there. The bait had just sat there suspended for about 3 minutes. Okay, I learned a lot about bass nature during that seminar. I learned that a bass is both naturally curious and ferociously territorial. Keep this concept in mind when you listen to the rest of this today and when you go fishing the next time. Naturally curious and extremely territorial. So imagine a fish sitting in a brush pile. A bait comes down and stops in that area, and it doesn't go away. It doesn't float up. It doesn't sink down into the brush. The angler doesn't rush and pull it away. The bait just sits there. Now, it becomes a battle of wills for the angler and for the fish. If you're an angler and you're fishing a jerkbait, the tendency is to move that bait quickly. And you're going to move it right away from those fish, and you're going to have a fishless day. You're going to go home wondering what was wrong, and so on and so forth. Now, if you can pull that bait down, stop it next to that cover where you think the fish are, and keep it there. How long can you keep it there? Can you count to 100? Can you count to 200? I mean, it's a battle of wills. You'll see. As you might imagine, I became obsessed with balancing my jerkbaits. I had always done it, but having watched this happen in the tank, and of course, the next night I did the same thing, and the fish did the same thing, and the next night I did the same thing, and the fish did the same thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, these fish are teaching me a great lesson right here. Now, I've since learned that a lot of people have been fishing like this for a long time. It is not something that people talk about, though. I don't think I have seen, maybe they're out there, but I don't think I've seen a YouTube video that talks about soaking it. You may not have ever heard of this term, but I'm going to tell you right now, the term is soaking it. If someone is soaking a jerkbait, this is what they're doing. It is a very, very effective technique for cold water and lethargic bass.
Change. It's inevitable. To improve, you must adapt. The sport is evolving. A paradigm shift is a fundamental change of basic concepts. Don't get left behind. Introducing Paradigm. Paradigm Reels by Ducket Fishing. Pro-driven.
My science background wants to give you a lesson in physics right now, and so if you just bear with me, I'll make this as painless as possible. Temperature plays a key role in the states of matter. Okay? Solids, liquids, gases are all determined by temperature. As such, it figures that when water is very cold, it is more dense. And when water warms, it becomes less dense. That makes sense? Now, I've got a very crude diagram here of what I'm talking about. The water molecules, let's think of ice, okay? Ice is frozen water. Those water molecules are packed in so tight, if you casted a bait to it, it would land on top and it would not even sink through. All right? As water warms, these molecules begin to move and move rapidly, and they spread out. And so that the warmer the water is, the less dense the water is. Okay, that's enough science. But think about this. Next time you open a package of a new jerkbait and you tie it on and you go out and throw it out, so you open up this brand new suspending jerkbait. It says right there on the package, suspending jerkbait. Okay. How warm was the water? What was the water temperature when they created this product? Okay, so when the company made this suspending jerkbait, what was the water temperature that they were basing the buoyancy of this bait on? Personally, I never trust a suspending jerkbait, because how in the world are the manufacturers of this bait going to know the water density of where I'm fishing? The answer is they can't. So what happens when you get your suspending jerkbait and you throw it out there, it's going to float up, it's going to sink, it's going to do everything except really suspend. Unless by some chance your water temperature is the same water temperature that the company made this lure based upon. Does that make sense? So one of the things that a lot of folks don't realize about jerkbaits is that they are set up the way they're set up based upon whatever water temperature happens to be in the test tank that particular day, if they're even tested at all. A good lesson for us to learn about water density is that temperature plays a big role in the density of water. When water is warm, the water is less dense. Those water molecules are more spread out, and a bait is going to sink faster. When water is cold, those water molecules are pushed together more, and a bait is going to float more. So when you open a package with a jerkbait in it, you're really at the mercy of whatever temperature that bait was tested, if it was tested at all. I like to take some jerkbaits, throw them in the pool, see what happens. Some will float, some will sink. Here you see that we have 3 that are floating on the left. We've got 2 that sank very fast, another one that sank kind of slow, and none of them are ready to fish yet, in my opinion. Okay, particularly during the cold time of the year. Now, when the water's warmer, you can get away with a bait that right out of the package, I think more often than not. But when it's cold, you need a really slow presentation. You need to slow things down. So typically, the way we fish a jerkbait, we throw it out, we twitch with a rod tip, we add our own action to the bait, and that's what a jerkbait is. It's one of the few baits that relies on angler rod tip action to get its action. But during the really cold months of the year, the way I'm working it right here, I believe is too fast. You might get some fish like that, but when it's cold, if their strike zone is small, if that bait moves through, those fish are not going to strike it. This is where I think it's really important during the cold months of the year to modify your bait. Now, one thing I like to do is I like to take a look at my baits, See the ones that are floating. The ones that are sinking, I will use that later in the spring when the water warms up, and I might want to drop one on a fish that's on cover. But when I'm in the cold time of the year, I'm going to add some lead tape. Now I've selected a bait here. This is the that blueback bait that was in the pool. This one was floating. I'm using this one because it shows up good on film, especially the underwater film. And let's take a look and see what it looks like in the water. I'll throw it out, pull it down to the depth I want it to be at. And you can see that this bait is floating up pretty quickly. Now imagine you've got fish in very cold water that are in a brush pile, and you pull this bait by them and you stop it, which is what you want to do with a suspending bait. It's going to float up much too fast. And the curious nature, see how fast that bait rises? The curious nature of bass, it'll be gone before they react to it. So what I want to do is I want to modify with some lead tape. Okay, I want to slow that bait's ascent down. What I mean by that is I want that bait not to rise as much. So I like to use Suspend dots. It's a Storm product. These dots weigh 0.2 ounces per dot. It's just a little tiny bit of weight, and I'm going to work with these dots until I get the buoyancy that I want and the suspending action that I want. And the thing is, it's going to be different every day because the water temperature is going to be different every day. Does a degree or two matter? Yes, it does. Causes those water molecules to be a little bit spread apart or compacted a little bit tighter. You guys, of course, realize what ice is, right? It's frozen water. It's water that's very cold. So those molecules are so close together, you couldn't even get a bait to drop through that. As water warms, those molecules move apart. So here's one dot. Let's take a look and see what happens to this bait with one small Storm Suspend dot on it. I'm going to pull it down to the depth I want, and it's still rising. It's better, but it's still rising. Again, I want to be able to keep that bait next to a brush pile or wherever I think fish are holding, and I want it to stay there. I don't want it to rise up, because in my mind, if that bait rises up, then the fish lose interest in it. See, it's slowed down, but it's still moving up. That might be good enough to catch him, but again, I got to get my mind wrapped around this. So I'm going to add another Suspend dot in this situation. So now I've added 0.2 and one more 0.2, so I got 0.4 ounces that I've added to this bait. Again, trying to figure out what the correct amount of Suspend dots or lead tape is to get this thing to suspend exactly the way I want it. And I cannot stress enough that it's going to be different every day. Okay, I'm going to pull this down to the depth I want, and then that's what I do. I don't turn the reel handle. I want it to sit in one spot. Okay, it's rising a little bit slower, but it's still rising. So it looks to me, in my mind, I'm still not through balancing this yet or modifying it. Yeah, I mean, that might get us bit, but it's just not enough in my mind. So being the perfectionist, I'm going to put one more of these Suspend dots. This will be the third one. I've now got 0.6 ounces of lead tape that I've added, and I'm adding it mid-body underneath so that the bait doesn't dip or tilt upwards. And let's see how we do now. I'm pulling it to now. I've got it down to the depth I want it. Now, the only thing moving that bait is current. It is not rising. It is not sinking. In my mind, that's exactly what I want. I can throw that bait near a brush pile where I expect fish to be. I can keep it there. And if you watch The rod that I have in my hand, I am not moving it at all. I'm keeping it in one spot. I mean, I've counted to 100 before keeping a bait in one spot just so I can make sure that I'm keeping that bait. Look at that. Just so I can make sure that I keep that bait next to the strike zone. Yeah, that's just about perfect right there. I mean, I don't know how much better you can get. Sometimes you can cut these suspend dots in half if you need to, but that is just what I want right there. In my mind, I feel like if I can fish this next to a brush pile or some standing timber where I think fish are, and I can hold that rod tip down in that spot and keep that bait. Look at that. Look at how I'm doing that. This is not trick photography. And again, that bait is just sitting right there, just where we want it to be. That's about as close to perfection as I know how to get to. But that's enough. If I could get that thing down there and hold it next to that fish holding cover, I know at some point the curiosity of those bass, the territorial instincts of those bass, they're going to come up to it and look at it at some point. Okay, do yourself a favor and give this soaking technique a try this winter. I think you'll be very happy with the results. Find yourself a likely looking piece of cover, make a long cast, pull the bait down to the depth that you want it, and just wait. Watch for line movement and set the hook if that line moves. You're probably not going to feel the bite. It's going to be very subtle. You're just going to see a line twitch or a line start to move, and that's when you swing on that fish. If you have live optic electronics, you can actually watch this phenomenon take place. We watched this happen last year. If you're familiar with Patrick Walter's win at Lake Fork, that's exactly what he was doing. He was watching his live scope. He was pulling the bait down, and he was moving it, but he would also stop it for long periods of time. And those fish would move up and they would hit it. So I know for sure Patrick Walters believes in soaking it. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. If you like what you saw, remember, give us a follow and hit the like button. Until next time, keep those live vests zipped and clipped, and we will talk to you again very soon.